At Underground, we had a really difficult message. We saw that for the first time in Mark, a human declares who Jesus is as the Messiah. And immediately, Jesus begins to say that he's going to go and suffer. And so he really redefines the term of Messiah as someone directly on the way to the cross. And we go on to read in the beginning of chapter 9, the Transfiguration, where Jesus is on the mountain and he shows them his full glory. So we see side by side the role of a Messiah as one who suffers, but one who has full authority. And in the middle of that, we read verses 34 through 38 in chapter 8, where Jesus tells the crowd, if you want to come after me, you have to deny yourself and take up your cross. So suffering isn't just for the Messiah, but it's for his followers and disciples as well. And we talked about how God does not cause this suffering, but that in following Jesus and surrendering our lives to Jesus, suffering happens. Because we live in a broken and fallen world. And really the heart of what Jesus wants is total surrender. He wants us to follow him in such a way that he alone reigns on our hearts. And I know it might not seem like it, but this call for total surrender really ties in well with the discipline of simplicity. And I have to tell you, simplicity is a very dangerous discipline. In fact, Richard Foster says that it might be one of the most dangerous because it's the easiest to control. It's really easy to go home and throw everything away and live in a tiny house and say, look, I have a simple life. But there's a very big difference between outward and inward simplicity. It's possible to own nothing, live in a tiny house on nothing, and seem to have a very simple life, but to have a very cluttered heart. You see, as a discipline, simplicity ties in to what the psalmist calls an undivided heart. A heart that isn't divided with different wants, different desires. A heart where Jesus reigns alone, no matter the cost. And that is what Jesus is calling for on his disciples in chapter 8, to follow him in such a way that no mountain is too high, no cross too heavy, because all we want is him. And our eyes are set on him. And that is the core of simplicity. Because if you have a heart where Jesus alone reigns, nothing else really seems to matter. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard wrote a book called Purity of Heart is to Will One Thing, saying that to truly have a pure heart, you must only will one thing. And that is the core of the discipline of simplicity, to have a heart that wants God alone. But that's really difficult. So many things are pulling on us, wanting to go in different ways. We live in a world that's simply cluttered and chaotic. So how do you have a heart that wills one thing? And so that's my first question for y'all today. How have you gone about maybe simplifying your heart? How can we as a community help each other live with an undivided heart? My second question, as we've talked about suffering and how suffering happens as we're following Christ, not that God causes it, but it just happens. When you love people, we tend to get hurt. My question is, what do you think about the statement to take up your cross and follow Jesus? And have you or anyone you know ever had to pay a price for following Jesus? Finally, Jesus calls us to lose our life for his sake, that we may find life. How does this apply to the discipline of simplicity? And what could the discipline of simplicity look like in your life? If you want to study simplicity more, there's a wonderful book written by Richard Foster, the same one who writes the book Celebration of Discipline, and it's entitled Freedom of Simplicity. It's a really easy book to read, and it tells us a lot about what it means throughout Scripture and in practical life to live with a discipline of simplicity. Thank you for your time, and I hope you have a good week.